signed a series of MOUs and agreements to expand the work of the Data Alliance to all SIDS through the creation of a SIDS Center of Excellence and a SIDS Global Data Hub. I don't need to tell you why SIDS are important. They're on the front lines of the climate crisis. There's a particular vulnerability to weather shocks and sea level rise. Earlier this year in May, there was the UN and hosted with Antigua and Barbuda the 4th International Conference on SIDS, of which came a 10-year SIDS program of action, the Antigua and Barbuda Agenda for SIDS, of which the SIDS Center of Excellence and the SIDS Global Data Hub are a key component. The SDG Data Alliance, with our partners at ESRI, developed, demonstrated, and published a prototype SIDS Global Data Hub to provide tangible insights into what capabilities will be achievable for SIDS in the future. All right, before we take a look at the hub, let me explain some realities when it comes to contextualizing data. And what are we doing to change that narrative? So here we have some data on depending where you're sitting, the left of your screen. But what does it tell us? There are numbers and dates, and if you look closely, you may not see it, but it relates to temperature. We know if we graph that data, we get more context. We can see that this is a time series of temperature data over a 140-year period. We can also see a sudden increase in temperature, a sudden and sustained increase in temperature since the mid-1970s. So now we have some information and knowledge from the data, but we still do not have enough context. For example, where does this data apply? If we simulate where this data applies over time at a time series animation, we have insights that enable us to take action. We can see where the temperature has changed over time, and the data now has much more value to the user. But can we do more so that the data is telling us more of a story for actionable impact? Of course we can. And that's what we're trying to do with the SDG Data Alliance and are now doing with the SIDS Global Data Hub. Here you can see multiple visualizations of data, from charts to maps, and even a story, which are all consolidated into a live dashboard within the SIDS Global Data Hub. And this is from the prototype that we launched during SIDS 4. But it's not just data and technology. There's a lot of work and training and capacity building being done. Our efforts are focused on applying the many data types and sources that countries and organizations have and applying them to real-world problems. This photo and this is an example from a SIDS workshop that we recently convened with Caribbean SIDS in Antigua and Barbuda just a few weeks ago. Participants from the Caribbean were aligning their national data assets, things like housing, coastal data, emergency services, to national priorities and development needs, from disaster resilience all the way down to tourism and the environment. Here's an example of a real-world problem for many SIDS and how we deal with it at the data hubs. If we look at this specific problem, that of vulnerability to coastal erosion, sea level rise, storm surge, and other inundations, we quickly realize that we need multiple, timely, accessible, interoperable, and integrated data sets to answer a myriad of questions. And here is where our data availability challenge appears when it comes to the SDGs, especially the 17 SDG target indicators, etc. While this problem loosely relates to SDGs 13, 14, and 15, there are no specific targets and indicators that address this problem. So this is a real challenge for SIDS, particularly as we think about aligning with the SDGs. This is why, again, we developed the SIDS Global Data Hub and launched it in Antigua and Barbuda in May 2024 within a live data hub platform that is currently available at sids.sdg.org. We have harvested and integrated data and tailored it to the needs, specifically to the needs of SIDS. The Data Hub addresses 4 SIDS themes: oceans, climate, tourism, and well-being. And it demonstrates this through data, maps, and applications that look at global, regional, national, and local data levels, what we term global to local. This is extremely important. And we initially have started working with a few countries: Antigua and Barbuda, Grenada, the Maldives, Tonga, and Tuvalu. As I said, this is currently live at sids.sdg.org. I will quickly now go through a few examples of what you can find in the SIDS Global Data Hub. Under our climate banner, we have a global sea level rise trends from recording stations around the world. This global data tells a story in itself. We don't have too much time or ability to go in depth, but looking at where sea level goes up and down can, on a global level from all these stations, obviously can help island nations around the world. A specific country example, if we look at Grenada, an island country of approximately 345 square kilometers in the southeastern Caribbean, population 125,000 people. Issues like increasing heat, rainfall, saltwater intrusion to the water supply have begun to threaten the country's two primary industries, agriculture and tourism. To evaluate climate mitigation and adaptation options, Grenada recently created a national digital twin, a 3D digital virtual representation of the island as a technology solution to addressing their multiple growing climate challenges. This digital twin provides a complete view of the country and serves the needs of decision makers in real time. Importantly, the digital twin has a predictive modeling component that enables Grenada to model sea level rise scenarios that impact storm surge and flooding damage, to see what will be impacted and where. That's important, the where, and to visualize future challenges posed by climate change. The next two slides show and model 1 meter and 4 meter storm surge. Imagine if all SIDS had access to this, this data and this capability. Tuvalu is another example, an island country in West Central Pacific Ocean, comprising 9 small coral islands, total land area around 26 square kilometers or 10 square miles. Place, in partnership with the government of Tuvalu, executed a new data collection exercise for the island of Funafuti. They did this in early 2024, or earlier this year. We worked with them to bring this data into the SIDS Global Data Hub. The data, which has been acquired by drone, from the air, and vehicle street view on the ground, enabled the government to estimate the impact of rising sea levels. And later, our technology partner, Esri, was able to apply machine learning to determine change in direction growth of the building stock from 2019 to 2024. A quick note, you can see in the two examples in 2024, on the left or kind of western side, you can see the success of some seawall reclamation that the government worked on. And so it's great to see this and important to see this in real time. Here's a look at the southern part of the island. Again, if you look closely, you can see that the amount of change that has happened in just 5 years in terms of the coastal erosion. So again, having timely data and digital maps is extremely important for islands as they create resiliency and combat climate change. Just here's another example showing sea level rise that I'll go through. So since SIDS 4, the Data Alliance and our partners have been developing what we're calling country map portfolios, which contain standardized information compiled into specific thematic maps across 3 development pillars: social, economic, and environment. The economic aspect is extremely important of this for countries. These are being published online through sdg.org and sids.sdg.org as a service. Agencies and organizations will be able to view and interact with the map portfolios of their country, informing their needs and requirements. Countries will then, by working with us, have direct access to the templates and models to build on these data, to build on these portfolios with their own national and subnational data. That's the work that we're starting on now with these initial countries, and the goal is to expand that to all 40 SIDS. Here is an example of the Tonga map portfolio. This looks at annual fishing intensity. And again, this is completely available are currently available online. To conclude, I want to go back to where I started. How we contextualize data as the beginning of an increasing value chain is extremely important. Here we have more data, numbers, but what is the context here? Does anybody have a guess on what these numbers represent? There you go. On its own, data has no inherent meaning, but if we give it context, it provides knowledge and insights. And yes, these are the precise coordinates of where we are today here at the Baku Stadium. So with that, thank you very much. You can get more information on the SIDS Global Data Hub at sdg.org, and I will pass it back now to Ashaki.
Thank you so much, Stephen. And I want to invite our panelists to join us on the stage. We have Ruth from the Commonwealth Secretariat, Ritu from IIED, and Stephen from the Public Foundation. And let me first start by thanking Stephen for that very informative, real-time, and almost a little scary information about what's happening, especially on the front lines of small island developing states, how much that land mass is changing, how our coastal areas are changing, and how important it is to have that real-time data to feed into the financing of projects, the policy advice. And just as you rounded up your presentation to say that data on its own is not enough, it's what we do with that data. And I think with that, it is so good for us to have two key agencies that are working with developing countries and working with small island developing states to join the Public Foundation in today's panel discussion. And Ruth, I wanted to start with you. The Commonwealth Secretariat has been a strong advocate for resilience in its member states, or as SG likes to call it, the family of the Commonwealth. How can data support Commonwealth countries, especially SIDS, in preparing and responding to the climate challenges?
Thank you, Asaki. Can you hear me? I'll start with a very stale phrase, maybe, saying data is king. And actually, I was 16, I think, when I've done primary data collection in a small country like India. And it is actually, I've been into the fields, I've been into the villages, and that's what made it very attractive for me to actually go and understand the situation, get the data, understand the context, because when you're actually there in the field, meeting real people with real situations, I won't say problems always,
Yes.
because it's different things that we were trying to study, including socio-economic issues, as well as their interest in politics in a state like Tamil Nadu, which is very, forward in terms of its knowledge, awareness, literacy of politics, even when I was a 16-year-old a long time ago. But when you think at the interesting presentation that Stephen presented, it shows the range of the data ways you can collect data now. The aspects of media, data, and technology, these three coming together, and that how people, we don't have to go as much to the field now as I had to do at that time, but people are generating the data themselves with just having, technology came, since people started using computers, since people started using their iPhones or mobile phones. I used to wonder why India was fast-tracking mobile phones to people in villages. And I said, what are farmers going to do with mobile phones? But it was revolutionary, because when you could not get a connection to a landline, this fast-tracked your access to a phone, to a farmer in a small village in India. And they were able to engage with what was going on around, including how do they price a product on a certain day. So, and they can now generate the data. I don't have to spend as much time and resources, or it's very difficult to do primary data, as some of us know. So, what I'm trying to say is, I just like to use the phrase that Stephen used, but I want to expand that a little bit. What data does, it actually generates evidence, firstly. And then what does it do? By generating evidence, it enables us to better understand. And I'm from the London School of Economics, so I use the phrase to understand the causes of things, yeah, and apply them to real world problems, toward finding solutions, and then transforming the world.
Yes.
So I'm sort of giving the intermediate steps to what Stephen just explained. So I think that's why, for one of the importance of what was launched at Abbas with respect to the centers of excellence and the data hubs, the key about it is when we go to platforms, when we go to even SDG tracker data, I can read some things for you. I don't have beautiful graphs that Stephen did, but we've just collated, my research assistant collated some data when I asked her to find evidence of how relating it to small states and their SDG indicators. And following the SDG tracker, if we take SDG 1, eradicate extreme poverty, I'll tell you the sits with no data on the global indicators. I'll just read a list of countries, not all of them. Belize, Cape Verde, Comoros, Djibouti, East Timor, Grenada, Marshall Islands, Nauru, the list goes on. So let me take another indicator, share below national poverty line. The sits with no data on this indicator are Antigua, Bahamas, Bahrain, Barbados, Belize, the list goes on. Let me take another indicator, SDG 5 on gender equality, violence against women from an intimate partner. Sits with no data on this indicator include Antigua and Barbuda, Bahamas, Barbados, Dominica, Mauritius, Seychelles. I can go on. Do you want me to go on? But I'll stop there for interest of time. But the point is, the value of what was launched at Abbas is that we have over the years, over decades, actually enriched our data. However, there are still huge gaps. But by what we saw, that is the potential of what exists. But then some of these data, even with the list that you described, it can capture certain amounts, certain types of data, but some of those other indicators still need a bit more effort to capture the data, such as the indicators I just described. So if we have data, we know what we need data for. And the fact is that our SIDS do not have that data yet. So for me, they are almost invisible. And when we are trying to find the problem, understand the problem, find the solutions, and transform the world, especially a region, a world, which is extremely vulnerable, facing existential threat. If we take, again, a piece of data, please correct me if my estimates are not right. If we take the total population of SIDS, it's about 70 million. So it's not small, because very often SIDS are, they're small, they're few. But actually, it is 70 million, which is at least the population of the UK, for instance. Yes? So that's why it's extremely important. Data is the centrality of us trying to solve anything at all. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Ruth. And I want to invite Ritu, because I know some of what you said resonates with her, coming from IIED and the work that they have been championing over the last few years, and more so the work in the last 2 years, working with SIDS on the debt sustainability services initiative. So Ritu, feel free to join in here and just let us know the role that data plays in the portfolio that IIED has been promoting with SIDS, and particularly if you can bring in a bit about the DSSS and the work that you're doing there.
Thanks. Am I audible? Yeah, thank you. So thanks for that question. And in fact, I'm a researcher, so for me, everything is about data. And a long time back, somebody told me that if you torture data long enough, it will give you the trend that you want. But for us, data becomes key, and as Ruth was mentioning, there are so many, earlier there was this, we had that limitation that you had to physically go and collect a lot of data, but today's day and era, we have so much of technological revolution, you have mobile data penetration, and that allows you to get hold of a much broader portfolio of data that you could not have imagined earlier. So, just drawing some examples from the work that we are doing. So, there are three things that I'll point out. One is, for any government, data becomes extremely important. I'm myself from India, and as Ruth was mentioning, growing up, I always saw planning commissions come out with those sectoral reports, and all of those data and analysis formed the basis of any program, any initiative that the government launched for next 5, 10, 15 years. And from there, when I moved to the UK government, I saw the same thing. So data became very, very essential part. And very recently, I also work a lot on loss and damage issues. And a lot of people talk about non-economic loss and damage. And you would see, especially in context of SITs, where sea level rise is becoming so prominent. More than economic, there's a non-economic loss and damage, and some things that will be losing forever. You can still rebuild the houses, you can still rebuild the roads and infrastructure, but the loss of cultural heritage, loss of the ways of life, or the loss of language, all of these things which are things that you can never have it back. But if you don't compile it, if you don't understand what the impact of some of these non-economic losses and damages are, you can never come out with solutions for that. You can never come out with programmatic response for that. But we were facing a big issue because a lot of this, as it calls non-economic. So how do you capture that in data? And there are different ways. It's not always numbers that value. There are ways in which you can capture that data, and especially with the mobile, everyone has a mobile in hand, which has a camera, which has a recorder. So one way in which we were trying to do this was, give simple tools to the people, crowdsource that data from the community itself. And that was around what are they really losing, and then create a repository of that, like we calling it online museum. And we especially want to capture simple things like how people made food, what were the simple medicinal plants that they could get from the local forests, and so on. So that's one aspect of data that we really want to collect, especially because we want to advocate globally as to what the world is really losing. And also for the people who are losing it, to create a repository so that they can tell their future generation of what their culture was, and so they can preserve it in some way. So in some ways, of course, it's not going to solve the problem because you are losing, but you can always help communities who are at that front line to find out ways in which you can solve some of those problems. Second, I would say, is around, everyone says that climate is now become a mainstream issue. It's no longer a sectoral issue. And for us, unless you have data, and a big issue is, you always see that climate is now creating health impact. It's pushing children out of school. It is creating sanitation. So all the SDG that you talk about, probably climate is impacting each one of them. It's not a separate SDG in itself. So how do you really solve that problem? And a big issue that we saw was the knowledge gap, and that knowledge gap was because you don't have that cross-sectoral collaboration and research, and that's not happening because you don't have data. And even if you have data, the data is not at a place where you can bring together different experts and try to work out that multidimensional aspect of impacts. So, and for that, I really commend that this initiative where you have brought together the data, and that is just the starting point where you can bring together a lot of people from different sectors to come together and collaborate in terms of research. And third, now coming back to your point about DSSS. So a lot of you who may not know what DSSS is SITS Debt Sustainability Support Service. It's something which was launched as part of ABBAS, Antigua-Barbuda Agenda for SITS, which is about trying to look at some of those, again, data came into play here as to how we came about designing this whole initiative. We typically talk about debt sustainability as something which is an economic problem, which is a financial management problem. But what we could do with the help of data was to look at how climate was really impacting all the parameters that IMF, World Bank, and other agencies typically use for debt sustainability assessment, like fiscal balance, like tax revenue volatility. And we were able to show how all of that was getting impacted by climate change. And that enabled us to present to a range of stakeholders, not just people from finance ministry, not just the people from, but also to show to the private sector investors, the lenders, the World Bank, and the other stakeholders that this is how climate was really impacting SIDS. And it was not poor fiscal management or economic policies that was leading to unsustainable level of debts. And that led to creation of or co-designing of this initiative which we call DSSS, Debt Sustainability Support Service, which is looking at this issue more holistically. So not just looking at debt sustainability, but also future protection, because data allowed us to understand how it's not a one-time impact, it's something which has increased in frequency 200 times in the last decade itself, and is going to increase much more in the future. And therefore, what do we do in terms of future protection of SIDS from these recurring losses and damages? And third was to look at what resilience investment can be brought about, and fourth was around capacity building of the SIDS. So the only reason why we could come out with this holistic solution was because we had some data. We were able to translate that data into knowledge, as Stephen was mentioning, and then work out what possible solutions could be. So I'll end there, but for us, no, like we can't understate the value of data and the knowledge, but also in terms of the debt sustainability assessment itself, and Ruth would echo me, because Commonwealth has created a data platform around debt related aspect. But a big problem there is, we could do so much more in terms of DSA, debt sustainability assessment, in terms of working out what might work for SIDS, if we had a much bigger portfolio of data around SIDS debt, the portfolio of debt, how it gets impacted by climate change, what are the other sectors which suffer because debt is reaching an unsustainable level, how it really brings down the investment in health, education, and other SDG parameters. So all of this data is needed, and right now we are lacking. And we would really look towards this hub to see how we could work collaboratively with you as we move forward.
Ruth, you wanted to come in.
Thank you, Asaki. Also, Ritu has already mentioned the Commonwealth debt system. It's called the Meridian system, which pretty much, it doesn't look into the causes, but actually that is a system which trains and capacity builds countries toward fiscal resilience through whatever they're going through. But that's where I think the DSSS is an important aspect, as to bring different aspects together in terms of understanding those things. So we've been doing this debt support work with countries for about 40 years now, and it's next year we're going to mark it as the Commonwealth Year of Debt Resilient, Innovative Debt Management. And in that sense, I think we have an opportunity of bringing these things together. And we are also working on how do we use that system, modernize it, use technology more effectively and efficiently, not only in terms of the data analysis, but also in terms of capacity building for countries. Because very often the teams, the people in these countries are one person, two people, or very few people. And then there's a lot of transition among staff as well, which means it needs so much of resources to actually manage and enable the fiscal resilience for especially our small states. So I just wanted to expand on that one. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ruth. And I want to invite Stephen to come in here, because the comments from the panelists have highlighted the issues within small island developing states. And we're seeing the hub as that major real-time initiative to fill that gap and to really help SIDS, so that in the next 2, 3, 4 years, we can now come back to say we no longer have a data problem within SIDS. And I wanted to get a few words from you on how you see the SDG platform the work that we're doing with the Data Alliance, the work that we are going to do with the Center of Excellence, as helping to provide that real-time assistance and capacity building to small island developing states in the area of data.
Thank you, Shaki. If we think about the value of data, as we showed in the slides, and data as an asset, right? I think it allows, from a donor perspective, it's in some cases it's less about, okay, how much can I contribute into this country and that. It's like, let's look at the information and data that we have as developed countries, private sector entities, investors, et cetera, because the data does have a value. And I think one of the things that we're trying to do with the SIDS Global Data Hub is obviously work with countries and the data they have at the national and subnational level, but also use the relations we have with the private sector, with the UN system, with donor governments, to really encourage them and work with them to bring the data they have and those data resources into the SIDS Global Data Hub. The Data Alliance, the SIDS Global Data Hub, we don't own that data. It's a platform for data and maps and for partners and countries to plug in. And so through the creation of these country portfolios, we are basically now able to go to island nations and say, we worked with our partners, Esri, a bunch of others. We've got some colleagues from Fugro who are here that have amazing data capabilities as well. And we're creating these dashboards for you already. And we're not washing our hands and saying, okay, now you're done. It's like, let's work together on how we leverage this data. You can leverage this data, add your own in it, and make it something that moves along that data value chain. Again, goes from the data to insights, knowledge, and then action and impact. And I think the SDG framework, while flawed in many ways, as we think about all the indicators and targets, it does provide an opportunity for these countries to and set some goals and objectives. So, okay, hey, this is where we have to be. This is how, and so we still think that's really key to integrate into the SIDS Global Data Hub. But ideally, what we learn in these next few years, working with hopefully, all the SIDS, is that whatever comes after the 2030 agenda, the next iteration of the SDGs, takes all of that we've learned into account, right? And starts to really think about how do we look at geospatial information, Earth observation, and that sort of thing as we start thinking about tracking and indicators going forward.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Ritu?
I just wanted to add two more points here, because, we've been using data and, in our course of work at various points, we have tried to bring together a lot of this data. But the problem with them is, a lot of these data hubs is, it becomes a one-time effort. And the whole point of a data hub like this to be useful is how can we bring about a process by which it constantly keeps getting updated. And for that, you can use online technology, like you have satellite data, imagery, and I saw in your presentation that you're using a lot of that. So that could be one way. But there has to be more networking. There has to be ways in which we can crowdsource some of that data more from the community itself, people who are on the front line, and constantly. But the way to incentivize that would be to take that information back to the community, because you would have heard, a lot of people listening to this would heard about this term locally led adaptation, because today it's the time where it can't be top-down approach to solving a lot of our climate problems. The only way you can do that is by allowing the community, giving the resources in their hand. But to enable them to do that, you also need to provide them information and that data. And data alone is not useful, because as we saw from your presentation, and we faced that problem too, because we were working a lot with community, where there is a government regulation which says climate information should be used for planning these structures at the local level. But the climate data is available in the form of changes in temperature, changes in precipitation. What would the community make sense of it? The best of climate experts would not be able to make sense of those heat maps. So for them, that data has to be translated into information. For example, like what impact would it have on change in groundwater level, for example, or change in the rainfall pattern, or change in the runoff velocity, and so on, so that they can use it to then plan their agriculture operation or plan their fishing operations and so on. So we have to figure out a way to send that information back to the community in a timely manner, but also in a format that they can interpret and then use it for their planning purposes. So that's another. I don't know whether you're already doing that, but probably one focus area that I would want you to look at.
No, and I think that's a great point. The community aspect is so important. We're not able to do it yet, but the idea is that in a similar way that you would approach the higher levels of government with these hubs and say, this is why we need to invest in more data or invest in specific areas, because this is what we have and now we can see it and we can take action. I think it's a similar conversation with the community as well. And as you said too, in terms of community provided data, there's big opportunities for communities and constituents to share the data and information they have, but they need to see some value out of it. You can't just say, give me your data and I'm going to put it in a hub that lives out here. It's like, no, here's the hub we have. Here's how you can work with it, how you can learn from it. And if you add in your data to it, we can do so much more. So that's a really important point. It has to go from the global, regional, national, but then the local level beyond governments to communities.
Sure, and I'm going to invite Ruth to come in, and then I'll invite each of the panelists to give their parting shot. Ruth?
I think I'll start with the parting shot so that we can conclude. So I think the fact that what public is doing is bringing in the media component along with data and technology is also important, in the sense that the point Ritu was making is about how do you present that information to people. So you need those media channels to communicate the information in simple ways that everybody can understand. I'll give an example of a survey we were doing about water issues in a village in Bangalore. The villagers were digging bore wells and they wouldn't get the water. Then they'll dig another bore well right next to it. So they were digging in too many places, and in fact that was actually stressing the water level even further. It's about how do you then communicate to this public or to the community, the people in the village, saying this is not what needs to be done, because they're trying to find solutions, but some sort of data and simple explanation. Because at that time, this is a few years ago, when I would ask them saying, have you heard about climate change? They had not, but then you had to break it down into simple sentences for them to be able to understand. So that's about, but the machinery is there, and this is where the alliance is important. And as you said, geospatial data we are using in our Climate Finance Access Hub. We use geospatial data in Fiji in particular, then to enable the country access global climate finance for their adaptation and mitigation projects. So we're doing some of that, but it's still like a drop in the ocean. There's so much more we can do, but I think I see a lot of potential in the platform that you've created. The one point I would talk about is in creating this data, it's also about the data protection. So while the system says, okay, this is UN, this is it is authentic and it's reliable, but we should also take into consideration the aspect of data protection, so people feel they are not compromised, their lives or day-to-day are not compromised, especially when we're talking about sensitive information or financial information and things like that. That's extremely important. And with technology, of course, there are other conversations happening about regulatory aspects of data and technology and other aspects of technology as well. But for me, what I'm interested in, Stephen, is there are many types of data. The list you gave of 8, there are more. But I think the importance in that list that you've already presented is the cultural, scientific, financial, and statistical. These are broadly the terms. But also for us to think about how will this system be able to collect that data more comprehensively. In addition to what data exists with the countries. For me, one of the issues about data hubs in countries is data may exist. There are two aspects of it. One is they're invisible, even what country has. But more than that, the quality of the data. So we need to do more in terms of working together with the countries on these two aspects. One, this platform is for the visibility, but the second thing is about availability, as in what data needs to be created. And secondly, the quality of the data should be in the format that it can fit into the understandings that we need to do, not simply producing the evidence, but in particular, the wider range of data. While people having a phone are creating data every day for decades now, I don't think we have the mechanism in the world yet to actually convert that into proper data for helping us understand things better. So I don't know if public wants to take that up going forward. I would like to suggest it's something really important, and perhaps public should be able to do that and venture into that as well.
Thank you, Ruth. Rutil?
Thanks. So I would say that data in itself is not sufficient. You have to make the data walk that extra 2-3 miles so that it becomes useful for the stakeholders. Only then an initiative like this would be able to sustain. And this I'm telling on the basis of experience from some of the similar initiatives we have done, and definitely not at the scale. And for that to happen, what we would really need is to make it useful for the government, for the community, for the debt managers, for the private sector investors, and so on. And this I'm purely talking from the DSSS initiative. So, for example, a very simple thing would be investment in resilience. So how do we bring about investment in resilience? Something that we've been promoting is why just look, especially for the credit rating agencies, is why just look at the risks of investment, also look at opportunities for investment. And the one way in which you can do is to account for the natural capital, the human capital, physical capital, and all of those capitals. So, what I would really want to envision is a data hub that really captures all of this data so that it allows you to then make that interpretation possible. Or, that's one example. The second example that we've been working very closely is on the voluntary carbon market. Everyone is talking about that. But we all know that, especially in context where we are working, there's a lot of small and marginal farmers. They're small-scale fishermen. They're not like big fishing companies. And for them to incentivize their action to be more sustainable, you have to ensure that whatever little carbon credits are generated goes directly into their bank account. And that can be, like we were looking at ways in which that can be made possible, was by reducing the MRV cost, the monitoring verification. And that takes away the bulk of the carbon credit generated because it's an expensive affair. But by doing, again, I'll use the same word again, crowdsourcing monitoring data, and it is possible. Like where we're saying that there are simple tools that you can attach to your mobile, get the soil samples on it and get the carbon data and then upload it. But the database has to be working in a way that allows that integration, and it would allow us to then capture into some of those innovative sources of finance, which is inaccessible to many of those smaller scale fishermen or farmers and so on. So I would really want to this data hub to have a much broader ambition, go beyond just the data collection, but also invest a lot in the analysis, make it more customized to the requirement of range of stakeholders. Only then I would see this sustaining on its own.
Thank you so much, Ritu. And Stephen, you have 30 seconds to wrap up.
Okay, I'm going to take a little more than that, but quickly on that point, that's an amazing and a really important point, Ritu, in that you think about the SIDS Global Data Hub on its own, it's a great thing, but yeah, sustainability, how does it advance going forward? The SIDS Global Data Hub sits as part of the SIDS Center of Excellence. So the idea being all of this data that's created and being shown in these hubs inform what's happening with this innovation of center, and how do we take the data and create new companies, technologies, et cetera, and bring new technologies to SIDS. So that's one. The second piece is that Already now we're working with something called the Development Bank for Resilient Prosperity, and Dr. Jean Leon, who's here. And the Data Hub will be a big part of that process, and right now how we're thinking about financing for resilience and all these things. So I agree 100%. It needs to go beyond just the data. How do we create these linkages with these other entities and areas to expand that? So that's one. Two, we talked about media data technology, a big part of what Public does. I want to throw on partnerships to the end of that. On the media side, it is extremely important that we're showing what these hubs are and talking about it, because you need to show people something. And not everybody's a data expert. And it can be challenging and difficult to understand data. We just finished the workshop in Antigua a few weeks ago, and we invited the national news there to come and sit with us for a day and learn about it. They did an amazing story. And so things like that are important for the community to start to see, this is what a data hub is and how we can use it. Data and technology, we talked about data. Technology, I think we need to leverage existing and future technologies to go to the community level and start to kind of get build on that community data and this data provided. That's got to be key going forward. And then finally, partnership. We can only accomplish this and do this with partners, right? And it's multi-sector partners. Public sector is extremely important, but also private sector, philanthropy, and nonprofits. We all need to work together. Nobody can, own one thing. We need to come together and take action and create these partnerships that lead to an ecosystem around data and innovation and finance to make the changes we want to see.
Stephen, thank you so much for wrapping that up. And I will end by saying one thing. For us at the Public Foundation, data is a human right. And I think that espouses all the various programs and projects that we have been doing for the last 12 years and the work that we will continue to do in the space. We want to thank our distinguished panelists from the Commonwealth Secretariat and the IIED. And as Stephen ended his note, partnerships, and we're looking forward to partnering with both organizations as we continue our work in small island developing states and developing countries. Thank you so much to the audience for joining us here at the Public Foundation. Thank you.